next speaker, David McNally, has enjoyed an extensive international business career, including assignments in South Africa, Europe, and the South Pacific. He is the producer of an award-winning production, The Power of Purpose, and an executive producer of a recently released inspirational film, If I Were Brave. David is the author of another best-selling book, You Eagles Need a Push, Learning to Soar in a Changing World. And today, we will hear his compelling message. So please join me in welcoming our special guest speaker, Mr. David McNally.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning. Thanks. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I heard the energy a little earlier. It was absolutely fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. So the context, however, comes from a luncheon that I actually had with a client of mine a few years ago, a large financial services company. And the VP said to me, he said, listen, I want to tell you something, David. We're not bringing you in here to help us to survive. He said, we're bringing you in here to help us to thrive. He said, you understand the difference between those two things? And I said, well, I think I do, but can you just maybe embellish it a little bit for me? He said, well, you know, I've been reading a lot of business books recently and these magazines, and they're all saying big headlines, to survive in business today, this is what you have to do. He said, speakers like you get up there and you talk about your 10 rules for surviving in business today. And he said, there was something that wasn't quite resonating with me. He said, and I couldn't figure out what it was. He said, but I remember that a few years ago that you said to us, remember that language is the software of the mind. Be careful of your language. He said, so I looked at that statement and I realized it was the word survive that bothered me. He said, so I went to the dictionary to see exactly what it meant, and David, there were 3 words attached to the word survive. Survive, to not die. That was it. He said, well, I know that's a very heroic thing at times. Let's face it, we all go through life's challenges. We have crises. We have international crises. We have all of the things that happen that put people into a survival mode. He said, but I don't think that people survive because they want to survive. He said, I think they survive because ultimately they want to thrive. He said, and David, when I went to the dictionary to see how it defined thrive, here's what it said: to flourish, to grow, and to prosper. He said, so shouldn't we be talking about this is what we've got to do to thrive in business today? Well, I went home that particular night and I was thinking about that distinction, and I said, that's a fascinating distinction. And I'd been looking for an idea for a new book. So I was reflecting on the distinction. I couldn't help but think about situations where you have people who are born into the most abundant opportunity and circumstances. It's all around them from the day they were born, and they still find ways just to survive. And there are those people who are born into the most adverse circumstances, and they find ways to thrive. What are the differences between those two groups of people? Well, I decided that I would make that the basis for a new book, and so we did a study, 600 different organizations in the business world, in the not-for-profit community, in the educational sector, and what we wanted to do is we wanted people to share with us people in their organizations who were thriving, and to tell us why they were thriving. And we were particularly looking for them to share with us the attitudes and behaviors that these people exhibited. Why? Because, simply put, our basic philosophy is the way we think and the way that we act is the way we create our lives. So we broke down all the feedback that we got into certain themes. Here's the first one. Thrivers constantly reinvent themselves. They are mentally agile and willing to risk. That's wonderful. You've heard that in a different way, but what does that mean on a daily basis? Survivors focus on people as ordinary. Thrivers see people as extraordinary. Survivors focus on limitations. Thrivers on great expectations. Survivors focus on meeting standards. Thrivers focus on setting the standards. Survivors focus on making excuses. Thrivers on making commitments. Survivors focus on getting through. Thrivers on breaking through. Survivors focus on hiding out. Thrivers focus on shining out.
A brand is a perception or emotion maintained by a buyer or prospective buyer describing the experience of doing business with an organization or consuming its products or services. So, when you look at brands that are strong in your life, the ones that you buy from, the ones that you go back to time and time again, what happens is that obviously you realize that the reason you go back is because they provide you with value. And as a result of that, a brand, we understand, therefore, is a relationship. You have a relationship. In a service business like yours, all you have is your brand. You know, all you have is your brand. All you have is your relationships, the relationships that you can develop over time. It takes time. So how would we define your brand? Your brand is a perception or emotion maintained by somebody other than you that describes the experience of being in a relationship with you. In other words, no matter what the intention is, the important thing is I cannot see your intentions. Right? You can't see my intentions. What you see every day is what I do. You see my actions. And as a result of all my actions, thousands of impressions are made upon you. And you make thousands of impressions of others. And as a result of all of those impressions, a brand develops. And so by our actions, we are branded.